Welcome back to Exploring Whiskey. I'm Kevin, and today I am solo. Eric and I have had some scheduling conflicts over the last handful of weeks between travel, COVID, and all that kind of craziness. So we will be getting back to regular episodes starting next week, but I wanted to do a special episode today because today is the 125th anniversary of the Bottled and Bond Act. This was a very, very important step in the history of what we know today for our whiskeys in America. The act was really pushed by E.H. Taylor, Colonel E.H. Taylor, which Buffalo Trace actually has a line of whiskeys, which most of them are bottled and bond, that is a nod to him and what he really did for the whole industry and whiskey in America. So before this act was passed, there was really good whiskey, and America loved whiskey, but the controls on whiskey weren't great. So there was a lot of really unscrupulous people that would do anything to make it look more like whiskey, do it cheaper to make a better profit. It's really what it comes down to, or fake how long it was aged and things like that. They were adding iodine, they were adding different coloring, food colorings and things like that. They were adding, they would steep tobacco in water to actually create the tobacco note and a darker note in the whiskey. They were doing anything they possibly could. And they could even go as far as, you might sample something out of a barrel or a bottle, but what you actually get is not the same thing. Colonel Taylor was a big fan of whiskey and didn't like that people were giving it a bad name. It was causing a lot of issues through the whole industry. So in March 3rd, 1897, they passed the Bottled and Bond Act. He worked with the treasurer at the time, which was John Carlisle, to create this act. So this act was really created a handful of rules that you had to follow for it to be labeled as Bottled and Bond. So it has to come from one distiller in one distilling season, which their seasons it's like first half, second half. So January to June and then July to December. So one distillation season, one distiller at one distillery. So sometimes you can distill at one place and bottle at another place. You'd have to label that if you did that. Outside of that, it has to be a minimum of 4 years old. It is bottled at 100 proof. So they can use water to proof it down. No additives whatsoever outside of water, and you can filter as long as it doesn't add anything to the whiskey. It does have to be bottled in glass, and it needs to be prominently displayed, Bottled and Bond. Your distiller number has to be on here, and the other one was it's a federally bonded warehouse that it ages in, which was at the time controlled by the Treasury. They would actually go in and confirm that the barrels are all in there and things like that. It had a side benefit for the government, which is part of the reason why they were good with it. They got to collect taxes because all the records were kept really nicely for them. So they would collect taxes. They gave a tax benefit to the distillers to go through the Bottled and Bond process, but they would not have to pay for the taxes until after the bottling. So closer to the sale versus paying the taxes each year as it's aging, which I think is what you need to do for non-bottled and bond. So there's kind of a give and take on that. The other interesting part is, while you will find it most times on a whiskey, so it'll be a bourbon, it'll be a rye, it doesn't have to. It's any aged spirit. So it could be a brandy, it could be a rum, a corn whiskey. Technically, it even could apply to a vodka or gin. It can really apply to almost any distilled spirit if you want to go through that process. But more likely than not, you'll see it on a whiskey. Really a lot of bourbons. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to sample a Bottled and Bond whiskey that honestly, Eric's not a huge fan of. So this is the Henry McKenna 10-year Bottled and Bond bourbon. So thumbs up for the bottle open. and give this guy a pour up. So this particular whiskey overqualifies, if you want to think about it that way. It qualifies, it's 10-year-old whiskey, not 4-year-olds, which is really what the minimum is. But it's only a minimum. It can be up to anything you want. Has to be at least 4 years old. So let's see. I find it funny that Eric doesn't enjoy this whiskey because to me, this is almost like quintessential bourbon. There's nothing spectacularly awesome about it, but it hits like all those traditional bourbon notes. The caramels, you get a little vanilla, some brown sugar. There starts to be a little bit of oak coming through on the nose, but it's not like a heavy age note that comes through. So sweet. I mean, this is a heavy corn with bourbon. So this is 78% corn, 12% malted barley, and 10% rye. This is a really heavy corn bourbon. Just a touch of sharpness from the ethanol, even though it's only 100 proof, but it has to be 100 proof to be bottled and bond. On the palate, there's a little more spice. You get a little bit of an oak note, a little bit of a rye spice note comes through. The sweetness is there. Ooh, a nice little warmth. I got a little tingle in like my jawline from that. And it definitely, like, it finishes with some of those age notes. So there's a little leather, there's a little bit of tobacco note, but not actually tobacco juice because, you know, it's bottled in bond. So I don't know. To me, it's a nice whiskey. It's not a spectacular whiskey, but it's a really solid whiskey. So Henry McKenna, to go back to the name, was an Irishman who came over into America 1837, settled into Kentucky, and he started to use Irish distilling techniques to make bourbon from, you know, kind of moving that family recipe over to America and making bourbon. So that's kind of what this knot is all the way back to that. It's a Heaven Hill product. So they're a huge distillery near Bardstown, Kentucky. I'm not sure if they're actually in Bardstown. Bardstown and Louisville. So they might have buildings in both. But they've been around for a very long time. They actually put out a lot of bottled and bond products. I know there's a handful of them. The Evan Williams has a bottled and bond. The Rittenhouse Rye's bottled and bond. They have a lot of, I think there's a Heaven Hill bottled and bond as well. So they really do a lot of bottled and bonds. The fun part for this one is it got hyped up a handful of years ago. It was kind of the what people would go to as, oh, this is their best everyday drinker. It's not bad. And if you find it for the MSRP or right around there, $30, it's totally worth it. The problem was you started to see it for like $50 and $60. And it was just, no, it's not that good by any means, but it's good. So, and it has a 10-year statement on it, which I think created some of the hype as well. That, I think, was really where some people got turned off by this particular release. It's solid. It's not a spectacular whiskey, but it's a really good whiskey. It's great for the price. It's a solid drinker. Nothing wrong with it. Trying to see if it was going to open up a little. We'll see. Not really. It's really just goes back to those kind of like base bourbon notes. The vanillas, the caramels, touch of brown sugar, a little bit of oak, a little bit of spice. That's about it. See, to me, that palate's nice. It's just, it's sweet, but it's got a little spice. It's got a little oak. It's got a little, there's a little something to it. It's got a body to it. It's not going to be something that just drinks too watery or anything like that. Speaking of having a little bit of body, how about we drop a couple drips, get that set up. I get more of the corn notes coming through. It's like a sweet kettle corn is really what it starts to come across as. It's pretty nice. Not a huge difference, but a little bit more towards the sweet kettle corn versus just like vanillas and caramels. Okay, so I will say the oak and the rye spice they're a little bit more pronounced. It's not overly spicy, it's not overly hot, but it's a little bit more pronounced with a couple drops of water. and it sits there for a while. It's got a nice oil to it. It's got like I said, it's got a nice body to it. So it does sit for a while. Got a nice warmth coming through the chest right now. So it's really coming in. Kentucky hug from a solid Kentucky bourbon. So overall, I'm going to say this is a pretty solid bottle. If you can find it closer to that MSRP of around $30, it's totally worth having on your bar. Solid price, good proof. Is it materially better than the Evan Williams white label Bottled and Bond? No, but it's a little bit different. There's a touch more age notes that come through on this. So it is, I will say this is probably a better whiskey if you like a little oak, a little age, like a little bit of leather note coming through, a little tobacco. If you like that, definitely worth grabbing. With that, I guess we'll thank the Colonel Taylor, and we'll thank the Treasurer John Carlisle for passing the Bottled and Bond Act, which led to so many other laws and just really breaking down and making sure that we're getting good whiskey. So, we'll thank you, nod to them. 125 years, very impressive. On another note, for March 3rd, I would like to wish my mother a happy birthday. Her birthday is today, so happy birthday, Mom. And as always, if you like videos like this, again, usually with Eric standing here, like this video. We really appreciate that. If you are new, subscribe, hit that bell icon. You get notified every time we put out a new episode. Love to hear from you. What's your favorite Bottled and Bond whiskey? Until next time, thanks for watching. Cheers.